Joining me now from New York City is Ambassador Marc Ginsberg, a former United States ambassador to Morocco. Ambassador Ginsburg also served as Deputy Senior Advisor to the President for Middle East Policy during President Carter's time in office, and currently serves as an expert advisor to several international organizations on U.S. foreign and economic policy in the Middle East. Ambassador Ginsburg, welcome to The Heat. Let me start with some of the developments here in Washington this week. There were reports flying around on Capitol Hill that the U.S. had suspended aid to Egypt, military aid, that is. Of course, the White House has denied this. The Pentagon, the State Department, they say it's under review. What's your thoughts on this? Do you think the U.S. is likely to suspend military aid to Egypt?
Well, there's so many components to that question because it's not a faucet that you can easily turn on and off. What Egypt gets is a variety of products. It gets services, it gets spare parts, it gets even major equipment like helicopters, and all of this is based on delivery schedules and agreements, so it's not like the president could just say stop everything. And so suspending any level of assistance doesn't mean that necessarily the Egyptians are not going to continue to get assistance.
Let me ask you a contextual question and take you back to the 1970s. You obviously played a pivotal role back in the Carter administration, but 1979, Camp David Accords, President Anwar Sadat of Egypt gets $1.3 billion in military aid, and it's stuck at that number even today. And the relationship in many ways has been kind of stuck, hasn't it? What happened with the relationship between the United States and Egypt? And where do you see that relationship today?
Well, the relationship with Egypt was always based on a unwritten understanding between President Mubarak and the United States, whoever the president was, which was essentially the following. We, Egypt, are going to provide the United States with regional support, defending the Camp David Accords, helping you on counterterrorism, facilitating U.S. naval presence in the Suez Canal, and as long as you don't interfere in our internal affairs or hold me accountable for what I'm doing, that's the bargain that we've reached with each other. And that bargain largely stayed more or less in place until Mubarak was overthrown. The United States at that point in time could not quite master which way the wind was blowing in Egypt, and so it was shifted between supporting the secular democratic forces, then it was supporting the military. Then our ambassador in Egypt was accused of coddling up too much to the Muslim Brotherhood. All of this is to suggest that we and the Egyptians sort of lost our way from the time that the Tahrir Square uprising began in 2011.
Well, let me ask you this. You mentioned the difficulty of suspending aid to Egypt. It's obviously the only lever the United States has in terms of influencing what happens there, and the EU as well. And now we hear Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates saying, hey, we'll come, if that aid is cut, we'll come in. What type of leverage does the West have when it comes to the influencing any kind of decisions being made in Egypt?
You have to read what General Sisi, the commander of the Egyptian armed forces and the power behind the throne, so to speak, is saying. He's saying to the United States, you've turned your backs on us. You have sent mediators to mediate in a dispute that you have no business trying to mediate. We believe, this is him speaking, we believe that the United States and the Obama administration are not friends of the United States. And so in the context of that type of proclamation and representations by the leadership of Egypt, the aid almost becomes irrelevant and academic, largely because while the Egyptian military ultimately wants to maintain that flow of parts and equipment, the Saudis are going to step up to the plate and make sure that if the United States doesn't sell it, then someone else will.
Well, let me ask you about this. President Obama, popular in Cairo initially, and you just touched on it. I think if there's going to be any agreement between the Muslim Brotherhood, the military, Mubarak, anybody in Egypt, it's that they are not very happy with the United States and its foreign policy. And you were once an advisor to President Carter. If you were in the White House, what type of advice would you be giving to Obama in terms of repositioning with Egypt?
Well, the United States needs to stand up for its values, and so that's why I've been consistent in my own public statements that the United States for its own values and for the message that we need to send for ourselves and what we stand for, announcing a temporary suspension of aid nevertheless is important. But I also would be advising the President that he should dispatch the Secretary of State to Cairo to sit down with the civilian leadership that is the leadership that more or less the military is working with to create this provisional government. They, after all, are going to be the facade, the civilian facade of the military here. And if the military wants to play a role, it knows, as it learned a very bad lesson, and let me remind you, it learned that lesson after Tahrir Square. It wasn't too short a time ago when the Egyptian people turned against the military because they were botching up the post-Mubarak management of the country. And I don't think that the governing supreme military leadership wants to be accused once again of having a failed civilian government. And that's why you have this civilian president, a civilian technocratic cabinet. That's who we should be talking to right now and doing everything we can to maintain ties to them. They're going to be running more or less a lot of the economic portfolios of the country.
Ambassador, what about the Egyptian people? You know, they flood into Tahrir Square. They want Mubarak gone. They want him held to account. They want democracy. It seems as though democracy is suspended. Hosni Mubarak on Wednesday, this mere technicality, he's released. You know, what's the message to them, and what do you think going forward? What are the thoughts about democracy for these people who fought so hard for it?
Democracy is a relative term in a country that, and in a region where it's almost equated with American-style Iraqi invasion democracy. Look, the problem with Islamic politics in the Arab Middle East, and the problem that the United States faces, is that what the Egyptian people want is accountability. They want a government that's going to try to restore a degree of stability, safety in the streets, bread to the people, economic empowerment, and an end of corruption. These require the creation of institutions and civil society organizations that hold government representatives accountable. In all of the revolutions that we've seen occur, everybody has thought that going to the ballot box is enough and enough alone. In all my experiences in the Middle East, that has never been enough. And so what the Egyptian people want in some respects, and if you ask them, they'll tell you what they want is Turkey. They want to be like Turkey. They want an Islamist-oriented government without the, shall we say, the megalomania of Mr. Erdogan. But they want a government that's accountable with a more or less capitalistic system that's basically helping that country develop the type of economic model that's bringing a lot of shall we say, opportunity for Turks under a, what I call, mildly Islamist-oriented regime. That's what they say in their polls that they want.
Ambassador, we're just about out of time, maybe in about a minute's time. Your thoughts, has the Arab Spring failed?
The Arab Spring has failed because it has not provided any degree of stability and democratic change that the people wanted. The only place where it succeeded so far is in the country that I represented and had the privilege of representing, and that's Morocco. Stable, secure, safe, and prosperous under a king that has delegated an enormous amount of his power to a newly elected government with institutions that are accountable to that government and not to the king.
Ambassador Ginsburg, thank you so much for your time.
Sure.